Hi everyone, welcome back to the Red Path. My name's Jack. Today we're taking a quick look at Berzerkers, getting started with them and how to get the most out of them on the tabletop. Let's get into the video. So there's four main areas in the video today. There are some more general tips, but we are mostly going to be looking specifically at Berzerkers and their data sheet abilities. So we're going to look at deployment and pre-game choices that you have to make. We're going to look at movement, general guidelines for how to use them in the movement phase and with Blood Surge, their data sheet ability. We're going to look at what you want to be sending them into, so targets. We're also going to be looking at synergies and how they meld, act, synergize is probably the best word, with the rest of your army. So up first, we're going to look at deployment. There's a couple of choices you have to make when you're deploying your Berzerkers. So when you first rock up to the table and you've seen who you're playing against, you need to decide if you're going to deploy your Berzerkers in transports, if they're going to be on foot, or if they're going to be in strat reserve. Those are the three main deployment choices, and there are pros and cons to all of them. Transports are obviously the most familiar option to anyone who's played at all in the past. The Rhino Rush is a term you might be familiar with or might have heard thrown around. This is basically just having loads of Berzerkers in Rhinos, sending the Rhinos directly at the enemy, Berzerkers getting out and charging. So the pros are they offer some protection, they offer a lot of movement speed, transports will move faster than infantry, and even if they just get out of a stationary Rhino in turn 1, they can potentially move 17 inches and then charge, because you get to get out 3 inches. You then move 6. If you have the right Blood God's Blessings, you can go another 2 on top of that with one of them. You can advance up to 6. It's quite a long way. And then 12 inch charge. Out of the Land Raider, you can potentially move the Land Raider up to 12 inches. You can then get out your 3 and then you can charge 2d6. So that is 15 inches and then charge. So both pretty good. So the downsides to transports, though, are obviously the transport can get shot and destroyed because it's on the table. And then your Berzerkers kind of like hanging out in the open, which is not ideal. The counter to that is putting them in strat reserve, the next option. So strat reserve is the ultimate protection against shooting because they're not on board. You can't shoot them. The downsides are that when they come on, they will likely have to make a 9-inch charge, barring some niche edge cases in your deployment zone, which is not good odds. You shouldn't be making a battle plan around making a 9-inch charge. They can get various buffs to improve the odds on that. So Angron can give them +1 to make it an 8-inch charge. If you attach a Juggernaut Lord, he can give them a reroll as well. Either way, not amazing odds. If you can give both, great, but those are some fairly severe downsides, I think. The third option is just deploying them on foot, out in the open, not out in the open, but on normal terrain, so half decent terrain. They're only really going to be getting shot by indirect fire, of which there is quite a lot in the new edition. So that's something to be aware of. Or towering is the other keywords that you should be looking out for. So against knights, this is something to really think about. The benefit, however, is that you can have the icon effect active for your first Blessings of the Blood God roll. So if you put a squad of Berzerkers with an icon on your home objective, which is available in most missions, you can get a 1 reroll in your 8 blessings dice, which could be pretty handy. It might be the difference between getting a buff that you really need or a buff that you don't need, I guess. So that's something to think about in the pre-game stages. When you're actually putting them down on the table, you want to be measuring opponent threat ranges. So there's a couple of strands to this. Against melee armies, you definitely don't want to get charged. You want to be the one charging, because our army buff Relentless Rage is +1 strength and +1 attack on the charge. Obviously, we don't get that anymore if we get charged, so we will always want to be the one making the charge. So to counter that, you just need to make sure you know how fast your opponent's units move. If he has any advance in charge, if he has any charge buffs to make longer charges more reliable. You just need to make sure you know how far they can go in a turn, and either make it so that it's a very long, difficult charge, low odds, and just live with that chance, or deploy completely out of range so he can't make the charge. They can't make the charge. So that's against melee. Against shooting, you want to do similar things. You want to check sight lines, make sure that your opponent can't draw an easy line on your berserkers. That if they want to come and shoot them, they have to expose themselves, so that you can go get them in return. So it's more trading. And you want to, as part of that, try and anticipate opponent movement. So even if they're not in line of sight now, if the opponent moves, will they be in line of sight then? So you need to also factor it into gun ranges. So with indirect fire, you need to assume they're going to move and then shoot. So factor that into a threat range. That's why we call it threat range. Yeah, that's movement. That's deployment, sorry. Up next, we're going to talk about movement and the blood surge ability. Similar to deployment, you want to be the one charging. So you want to set up the best charges possible. This doesn't necessarily always mean the shortest charge, although often it will. For example, if you know a unit has really nasty Overwatch, so in the past it's been Flamers. There are many other rules that make Overwatch very unpleasant nowadays, but in the past it's been Flamers with the auto hits. If you know a unit has nasty Overwatch, maybe use your movement or advance and charge blessing, maybe. Use your movement to get behind a wall so that you can charge from out of line of sight, so they can't overwatch you because they can't see you. However, as I said, often the best charge will be the shortest charge. Personally, I generally tend to try and set up 5-6 inch or shorter charges. 7 inches on the very outside, and against good players you'll find that you do have to set up longer charges. Anything over 7 inches I will assume is going to fail, and it's just nice if it comes off. Or I'll do it if I'm losing and I have to force the issue. Otherwise, you should be looking to move into cover, into ruins to hide, because although there is a lot of indirect fire, the vast majority of shooting is direct. And you want to have an eye on melee threat ranges as well. If you're not planning to charge, you need to try and make sure that your opponent isn't going to be able to charge you next turn. Okay, so that's movement. In terms of blood surge, this has changed a little bit since the 9th edition codex. Basically, it means that whenever your berserkers get shot, and if any models are destroyed, you can make a blood surge move, basically representing your berserkers going nuts and charging directly at the nearest enemy unit. Basically, you roll a dice and you move that many inches straight towards the nearest enemy unit. It can be pretty handy. So there's a couple of situations. I'm quite unimaginative with my usage. I know some people are much better at it than me. If the straight line takes them out of line of sight of units that haven't shot, then I'll generally do that. That's a situation in which I would use blood surge. Or if it takes them into a melee unit with stuff that they either don't want to get charged by, or a shooter unit, then I'll do it then. Because it's the opponent's turn, defender gets priority, you will hit before them, unless they have a rule that says otherwise, like fight first. So no downside there, as far as I'm concerned. It can also tie up units that were going to shoot other things. It can just prevent your berserkers getting shot. If you're going something that has only shooting and no melee at all, then there's a chance you've tied them up into your turn as well, which might tie down Overwatch and stuff like that. So that's important to note as well. In terms of targets, so berserkers are not the heavy hitters or cheap traders that they used to be. OC2 seems to be the new OBSEC. So these are designed, they're battle line troops as well. So they're kind of designed to hold objectives for you. And berserkers as melee infantry, they probably want to be holding mid-table objectives or opponent objectives. But OC2 is quite nice, so we want to use them as that. If you use them as mid-table objectives, you want to be sending them into not too heavily armoured stuff. They have quite a lot of attacks, and Strength 6 is quite a nice break point, but they are only AP 1, which means they won't go through things like Custodies that well. The Strength 5 and Strength 6, both quite nice. Strength 6 in particular makes Berserkers very good into light horde units. Strength 6 is especially valuable against Toughness 3 and Toughness 5, which there is a fair amount of about. So all flavours of Elf, Guardsmen, Orc Boys, all very good targets with their low armour saves generally, and toughness that we hit those nice break points for. The Eviscerator special weapon, the equivalent of the special weapon, will kill heavy infantry, but the low volume of attacks means it shouldn't be relied on too much, especially in the 5-man squads. With 2 of them, you can maybe risk a bit more, but it's gone are the days of that mulching vehicles, basically, with the splaying of toughness values. Basically, horde units are what you want to send this into. Light infantry, they will blend through light infantry. Gords are another one. Tyranids are another one that they would be very good into. Heavy infantry will you can probably surprise some heavy infantry units with the Eviscerators. The Eviscerators will be particularly good into things like Marines, because they hit their strength 8 already. They'll hit strength 9, so they'll be wounding most Marines on 2s, which is also quite a nice breakpoint. I would also, while War Gear is free, I don't know if this will change in the future. War Gear is currently free, so you might as well take as many plasma pistols as you can, which is 2 in a 5-man squad or 3 in a 10-man squad, unless I'm much mistaken. Being able to plink a wound here and there can be useful. It's relatively high strength, so into things like heavy infantry, very light vehicles, pretty handy to soften the target up before you go in, and they're free. And there is a nice little synergy with things like Mauler Fiends. If you kill a model of a unit that your Berzerkers maybe aren't charging, Mauler Fiends get +2 to charge against understrength units, which is good. Yeah, and that kind of leads me nicely onto the Synergies section. So, the Icon of Khorne is the most obvious one on the data sheet. Each time you make a Blessing of Khorne roll, if the unit's bearer is within range of an objective marker you control, you can re-roll one of the dice. Couple of things to note. As far as I can tell, you can have multiple units in range of the same objective for multiple re-rolls. It is important to note that you must control the objective. So your home objective is probably the easiest place to do this. Re-rolling obviously gives you a lot of flexibility to fish for certain results if you really want a specific blessing. So like if you're going second, you're about to get charged by a load of angry blood angels and you want the fight on death one, you can manipulate the dice roll a little bit so that you can try and get that. So that's the data sheet. In terms of other synergies, there are 2 other areas to look at. So characters, I mentioned earlier the Lord on Juggernaut. Bust them to give mortal wounds on the charge, and as I said, we always want to be charging. It also allows them to reroll advances, charges, and the blood surge roll. Very handy for a big squad, especially out of Strat Reserve, if you are looking to hit that 8-9 inch charge. The advance also helps if you have the advance and charge blessing, so that's pretty nice if you're planning to use that. If you're planning to like lightning strike really early with a lot of your army with advance and charge, Lord on Juggernaut can be quite handy to buff that. Invocatus provides fallback and charge. If he's attached to them, it's not necessarily that useful, but it's quite situational. His other rule that he has is giving them Scout 6, which means they can pre-game move 6 if they start on foot. Obviously pretty good. It extends their threat range a bit, so they can move 6. They can then, if you get the advance and charge one in the first turn, blessing in the first turn, you can move 6, advance another 6, so they can go 18 inches and then charge. Potentially 20 inches if you go all in on movement in turn 1, and then charge. You can also attach Khorne. He gives them reroll hit rolls of 1 and wound rolls of 1. One of our only sources of rerolls, so pretty good. He's also a blender himself, and the downside still with the Betrayer is that he can kill Berzerkers, which is obviously not ideal. Potentially the best character option though is the Master of Executions. After a couple of students of being quite bad, he has been given the strongest melee rule in the game with Fight First. So it is one of the best abilities in the game for melee armies. It gives you priority in the fight phase even over units that have charged. So if you get charged and your Berzerkers have a Master of Executions attached, they will fight before the charging unit, which is obviously very powerful. Unfortunately, it doesn't affect if you make the charge, so it's weirdly more of a defensive pick, but very, very powerful, and only 80 points. So that's something to note. The thing to note as well, another thing to note is with transports, both the capacities for our 2 transports have been upped. So it used to be 10. which was a bit of a problem if you had characters with Berzerkers. Now, if you have a squad of 10 Berzerkers with a character, you can put them all in a Land Raider or a Rhino because their capacities have been up to 12, which is great. So, obviously, the Rhino is a dedicated transport choice. The Land Raider is a heavy sport and comes with some guns. The Rhino is much, much cheaper, but the Land Raider is much tougher to kill. So, that's another choice you can make at the list building stage. Cool. So, I hope that's helped everyone. That's been a very brief overview of Berzerkers and how they fit into a World Eaters army. Hopefully, you've learned something. Come join us in the Discord. There's a link down below. Tell us how you're using Berzerkers, how many Berzerkers you're running. There's definitely no wrong answer with a World Eaters army. You can run as many or as few Berzerkers as you want. But they are a very, very solid troop choice, I think, especially for the points they cost. Yeah, hope you enjoyed the video. Most importantly, though, guys, stay healthy, stay safe, and kill main burn.